Podcasters Roundtable, round 29. Let's get personal. On this round, we're going to talk about, well, this round is a new roundtabler's fault. I'll say fault because if it sucks, we can just blame it on him. If it's good, then it's going to be, it's definitely my idea. But no, we will get to the introductions in a second. We're going to talk about, can you be too personal on your podcast? When you go to share stuff, how much should you share without, well, I guess we should just say how much should you share without me sort of biasing the conversation. I'll say how much should you share? And, there's a question of vulnerability. So let's meet the panel, and I'm actually picking some of those words. We'll go with the new roundtabler first, one of the new roundtablers, Tyler Smith, who just woke up from a nap. Welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this actually comes from, so this is good insight. As I do oftentimes on the show, I explain how do you get on a roundtable. Well, first you circle myself, Dave, or Daniel, and get in touch with us and say, hey, I've got an idea. I'd like to talk about this on the roundtable. Or you go to Podcasters Roundtable, you sign up via the email list, and then you'll get put into a forum to suggest some ideas. Tyler took advantage of that. I was digging through the pile. Of course, I don't get to as many. It takes a while to get on, let's face it. But the nice thing is it's not necessarily in order, right? If you put your submission in today, it doesn't mean you're going to not get to it till we get to everyone else. It really depends on topic. So Tyler hasn't been on. He was available, and I saw that not just him, but a couple people had said, can you get too personal in a podcast? And Tyler, you mentioned something about being vulnerable. Now, I don't know if you remember that submission. Do you remember that at all, that topic?
I think I remember making the submission. You mentioned that it won't happen right away. My first thought after like a few weeks was, I guess I'm just not big enough. I guess they want higher profile people. That's great feedback, and so that's my fault for not putting that out there. Yeah, it's totally only based on, I just go into basically it generates a spreadsheet. I look at the topics, I see who's available, and we go. Sometimes I base the topic, is it sort of relevant to today? Is it an evergreen topic? This is definitely evergreen. You can talk about this anytime. Got in touch with you, and you were fortunately available on very short notice. And so we did it. So, well, before I ask you what you meant exactly by that, you submitted a couple different things, and two of them we have covered on this. One was competition in your niche, and I'm not recalling the other one. But this one I don't think we have, although I imagine we've hit on this subject a little bit. I dug through the archive to see if it was exactly. But before we get back to Tyler and the main topic, let's keep going down the screen here. And the next guy, now I don't know, this is a bit of a technicality, but this is a Podcasters Roundtable. The key is we don't want to do anything formatted, normal, whatever here. So we might be branching out a little bit here, but I have a personal connection to this next roundtabler. Neil, welcome to the roundtable.
Hey, thanks, Ray. I'm really happy I could finally find a topic that I could jump in and contribute to.
Now, Neil, are you a podcaster exactly?
So you and I debate about this on a regular basis, and I like to call myself a content creator because I think podcasting for the old school guys like yourself and the work that I did with you before qualifies me as one, but my main content that I create, a tech blog and YouTube channel is not qualified, if you will, in a technical perspective as podcaster, but we all have the family love here, right? We're creating content for the internet.
That's right. So a little behind the scenes, Neil was a production assistant, if you want to say that, on the Produce Picker podcast. So we worked together on that show. About halfway through, Neil joined me. We actually met at a meetup for Geek. At the time, was it Geek Beat or
Yep.
Geek Brief?
It was still Geek Brief. It was still Geek Brief.
Yeah, Geek Brief. That's how it started, and with Callie, and so we hit up a friendship. And this is a great way to help with your own podcast. I always say, go out there and knock on the door of your family, see who can help you, get your friends involved. So it really helps to have some help, especially when you're creating video. Neil and I started off with video. He went primarily with a YouTube channel, which he could throw into a feed, but it does present an issue for podcasters because large videos aren't necessarily friendly to paying for hosting. So I would say that half of the reason Neil is probably YouTube only is that it's expensive to be a video podcaster. Of course, there are ways around it, but is it the best way? Oh, another roundtable. We better not go down there.
Well, it's just like Good Mythical Morning. They just pulled all of their video feed off of iTunes because of it. So
Wait, because of I didn't hear that. What was the reason?
Because they were hosting the video was getting too expensive for them.
Very interesting. Good. Yeah. Well, see, you're contributing already. So welcome to the Roundtable, Neil. He's also a new Roundtabler. Returning again, who I see he's muted, so I'll jump back. It's probably me. I'll unmute him, and we'll get back to him. And we will go down the line. Mr. Co-host, Dave Jackson, welcome back.
It's nice to be back. It was weird listening to the one, and I was like, oh, there's my buddies. But it's great to be back.
Killer. And co-host number 2. I could be co-host number 1. I'll let them fight it out.
That's right.
Daniel J. Lewis, welcome back, buddy.
Thank you. I'm from theaudacitytopodcast.com and also mypodcastreviews.com.
What's going on behind you? It looks different. Is that like a white sheet for white background thing?
It's actually, this is something that, a little tip for video. If you want a nice solid white background but you don't have a lot of light, a great way that you can do that is hang a white bed sheet or a white shower curtain in front of a window. And then but you do get somewhat of a halo effect of a glow around you. This is actually the exact same shower curtain that I usually use, but I just got a lighting kit that I'll have a video and initial review on my site soon, but I have a light behind that as well as a light up above me and some other lights I'm not using at the moment. But
Gotcha.
I'm excited to now finally. Yeah.
You better be careful because the sound you heard is Jeffrey Powers, and he just posted, I think today or yesterday, that my friend has been patented or something like that, right? Jeffrey Powers, welcome to the Roundtable. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jeffrey Powers from geekazine.com, howtorecordpodcast.com, and many different other shows. Apparently there was a patent that was issued by Amazon for a white background for photographers, and I'm trying to figure out if it's also videographers, but I'm guessing that that's going to be the case. So
Nice.
you're halfway in, halfway out, Daniel, so I think you're good. Dave, you are so much in trouble.
Yeah, that's it. Well, my thing is, this whole time I thought Daniel just had a natural angelic glow behind him. I thought it was just,
Well, I do, but this is just a white background to enhance that.
Daniel, all you need, my suggestion, Daniel, is to start a National Football League podcast and include the team title in your name so that you can be in total violation.
Yeah, I was thinking of calling it like the MLB, NFL, NABB official podcast.
There you go. The official NBA in the NFL goes to MLB, right? So if we are making a joke about recent sports podcasts being pulled from iTunes because they're using a team's name, and there was a little bit of an uproar over this, but I get it, right? I mean, I get it. First of all, it's just straight up, it's just it's their copyright. Yeah. But it's a dilution of your brand. It's great. There's this thing with podcasters. The immediate reaction is all I'm doing is promoting your brand, right? I am your biggest fan. I'm out there talking about it every week. But some shows are going to be good and some are going to be really bad. So, how do you pick and choose? So anyways, that's for the lawyers to sort out. Suit out. That's actually a good slip. Lawyers, suits.
It works,
yeah. I like that. All right, we'll get back on topic here. And, great panel. Tyler, as I alluded to, do you remember a little bit about that specific topic? And more importantly, what were you thinking of when you specifically used the word vulnerable, right?
Well, first off, that's always a good question to ask yourself when doing anything relating to podcasts is what was I thinking? Because it winds up being just a big time suck, and you better be committed to it. So that sounded too negative. I apologize. So I host 2 podcasts now. The one that we put out there as far as like my official podcast is Battleship Pretension. But then I also host one called More Than One Lesson, which is admittedly it is a film criticism from an overtly Christian point of view. It is, though there's a lot of movie talk in there, we do categorize it in the Christian. In the religious/Christian category of iTunes, and so I will try to get all the Christian stuff out of the way right now, just in case anybody is offended at, I guess, the notion of religion. And one of the things is that the nature of, I would say, almost any religious belief is acknowledging that you're not perfect and that you have made mistakes, and thus necessitating the need for this religion. And so my Christian podcast kind of came. It doesn't come completely out of that, but that is part of what informs it. If I am talking about a specific movie and discussing a certain theme, I feel like people should know why that theme resonates with me and why some themes don't. And so I'm very open about like where I am in my life right now, not merely my spiritual life, but also my life in general. So that could be how my marriage is going. I don't go into a lot of detail, especially if it involves another person, because I may not have permission to share that if it makes them look a certain way. But, it could be how my marriage is going, perhaps how my career is going. Is that leading to any kind of insecurity or identity crisis or something like that? And so this idea of vulnerability comes out of that, because I know there are some people, podcasters and otherwise, who have said, well, you need to be careful about using the podcast as therapy, as though, well, you can't afford a psychiatrist, so you'll just put it out on a bunch of faceless strangers or something like that. And so so that's what led to the question, because I've been podcasting for long enough that really the only way I know how to do it is the way that I do it. And so I thought I'd put it out to other people who've been at it a while and know that you're always going to bring your own personality to it. And so the more you bring of yourself, the more vulnerable you might wind up being, whether consciously or unconsciously. And is that viewed as a good thing, or is there a limit to how vulnerable you can be?
Well,
so that's where it came from.
Vulnerable to what? Because to me, vulnerable means putting my guard down and somebody can punch me in the face. So you're vulnerable to what?
Oh, you're vulnerable to people punching you in the face,
Okay.
Verbally or by way of email.
So basically, yeah. Okay. So by putting out an opinion, that gives the ability to somebody to then openly just disagree with you and start
absolutely.
a fight. Okay.
On Battleship Pretension, oddly enough, this was years ago. My co-host, his girlfriend of many years had broken up with him, and he was very open about that on the show because it was definitely affecting his general mood. And so most people emailed and and said, like, I know this is a hard time, but I know you're going to get through it. But then there are some people, one guy specifically, if you were to go through our iTunes reviews, you would see one that he doesn't directly reference it, but if you know what you're looking for, you see that he is making reference to how pathetic it is. And how, these two nerds talking about movies, and one guy, his girlfriend broke up with him. That's pathetic, and that kind of thing. So my co-host, by opening up about what was going on in his life and the way that might affect how he talks about film or how he relates to the audience in general at that moment in his life, he opened himself up to somebody making fun of him who didn't like what we did and was looking for something to latch on to that would particularly hurt.
See,
the internet does do that.
Tyler, I make a point really quick to what you just said. I think the key there is there are people out there that are constantly looking for a reason to attack you, to be a troll. Yeah. It happens to me all the time on my YouTube channel and when I do my videos. One little slip up. It's just that one little slip up, and I get a barrage of trolls calling me a moron, calling me an idiot, calling me unprofessional. And I mean, literally, the last video I did, I accidentally put a case on a computer the wrong way in the middle of a one-take shot, and I have a stream of trolls. And it's always that one thing that somebody's looking for. Now, if that's something of a personal effect that you mentioned about your personal life, then in my opinion it makes the negative commenter that much more pathetic, in my opinion, that they're looking for the littlest things to attack you. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately I think it's the way of the internet. What does everybody else think?
I totally agree on that. In fact, normally when I do my show, you'll see me in an orange shirt, and the reason why I wear the orange shirt with Geekazine across is to, one, show my brand, and two, kind of stand out from everybody else. I mean, orange shirt, blue Google Glass. It stands out on the audience. But I get a lot of trolls when it comes to YouTube talking about how I'm a.
You could have stopped right there.
Oh yeah, pretty much. But I get my favorite one is they let prisoners do podcasts.
It's the goatee and the bald
Yeah.
white supremacist look you got
Oh yeah.
going.
Oh, thank you very much. So all I have to do, I just throw flaming stuff into their windows at night. It's all good. So, but getting back on the hate thing, the one thing I was trying to find the article before I started speaking on this, but a couple weeks ago, I found out about a person by the name of Chantel. What was her name? Chantel. Well, she's a model, and she's got a condition called vitiligo, which is a loss of pigment in the skin. It's a condition I actually
Jackson. Isn't that
yeah
what
the
Michael Jackson was?
the Michael Jackson disease. This is actually a condition that I have. In fact, if you watch my videos from 2007 to now, you'll actually see my skin tone is a lot darker back then than it is now. And I would have the spots, the white spots and stuff like that. Luckily, I never really had it on my face too much. And when it did, everybody just thought, oh, you wear sunglasses a lot because you got, the spots around your eyes. But the reality was, I still suffer from it. I still have spots that once the summer happens, they're just going to come out. That's my personal part to this, and I always thought, and I've talked to Jennifer several times about should I go down to like Sephora or something like that and get some sort of base and even it out, and maybe
We just lost him.
Do we lose
what was
you?
that?
There he's back.
I didn't
Oh
hear
no,
you.
I just heard. Oh okay,
So yeah, so I mean, so
sorry, sorry. There was another voice, another sound in my ear. So
it's
anyway,
the Google Glass. Google is trying to
Yeah.
communicate with you.
Google
That
is
is,
exactly.
But bottom line is that that's what I bring to the table, and that was one of those things that I suffer with on a weekly basis. Because I actually have had some trolls come up and say, you should wash your face, or things like that. It's just kind of like, what do you do there? And I'm not going to hide it by any means.
Right. So one of the things that when you submit a topic to talk about, you can submit as many as you want. And Tyler mentioned besides this, he talked about dealing with negative feedback, I think, and we actually did a round on that. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about so far. Because internet trolls. Doesn't matter if you're perfect and you're going to get negative comments. It's going to happen when you put yourself on the internet. But what about what we choose to share on our podcast? So some people, the immediate response is, and the whole topic can be shut down by saying, hey, it's good to share a little bit, and too much is too much. Gary in the chat room, he said that he tries to use the WIIFM, I think. What's in it for me from a listener's perspective? And he says he doesn't think people want to hear about the day-to-day aspect of his life unless it relates to beekeeping. Gary does the beekeeping podcast. He said some of that does creep into our conversations, but we try to keep it on track. It says on track to the show notes. And he hates podcasts that spend the first half hour talking about how their day was. And we mentioned that on pet peeves, right? And that is a definite pet peeve. A lot of people want you to get to the point unless you're doing a show that is sort of like, hey, I turn the mic and we do whatever. Yeah. Daniel, Dave, do one of you guys, well, Dave, you get personal on your podcast, and I think you've actually gone both ways. Tyler mentioned religion. Dave had a run-in with, I don't know if it was a troll or what, but he commented on your sharing of your religion at the end of your podcast, and I think that sent you on a 5-episode.
It wouldn't die.
Yeah, it wouldn't die, but it was good. It's a good conversation. So, what do you think about this topic about can you share too much on a podcast, right?
I think of it as nothing to do with your topic. What I try to do is I always try to encompass stories. Always work. They always work, and there's when they're used to help illustrate a point about your topic. So like Gary said, he'll use a story when he's talking about bees. But if I just, like, hey, today, guess what? I had a class with 8 people in it, and I had 1 day's worth of material, and I stretched it into 2. Great. It has nothing to do with podcasting.
Right.
So I can share that, but okay. And at the end, one of the things that, Daniel, I think you said it in your last episode, you talked about having a takeaway. At the end of the episode, what do you want people to do with your material? What do you want them to feel? Something, you have to move them some way, as opposed to, well, Dave likes chocolate milk. Great, wonderful. who cares?
Yeah, the personal touch, like I agree. I think if it's going to add to the topic of your conversation or the episode's overall, subject matter, then I think it can be useful, because to me, it's kind of, I'm going to quote a line from You've Got Mail, because my wife and I watched it last night. It all should start with personal, right? We're all personalities, and we're all trying to project that personality online, whether it be in a video format or an audio format. We're not just robots that are reporting the news or talking about bees or talking about movies from a religious standpoint or teaching people how to podcast. We're personalities that are trying to share that information. So I think personal information, obviously you're not going to give out your addresses and your kids' names and all this kind of stuff, but bringing a little bit of the personality of who you are in is an engaging factor, and maybe some people will like you because of your personality and not necessarily your content, and may watch you because of it.
Would you guys say that it's sort of a feature of podcasting that we get to be a little bit more personal? Daniel, you have several shows. What do you think about sharing your personal life? And I guess I don't know if it has to be personal life so much as the details of your life in a podcast.
Well, people are first attracted to the content, so it's always important to lead with that, and we shouldn't take our personality out of it. Like, one of the reasons that I said, yes, we should have Jeffrey on here is I was remembering how much, Jeffrey, that you had your personality show while we were live streaming at CES with the Tech Podcast Network. And your personality was very different from everyone else's. And in some ways, that was a little bit rough to some people, because it's like, oh, he's so different, but yet it's so you.
Engaging.
And, engaging and presenting the content in your own personality. So I think that there's definitely a place and an absolute need for that. But, and the stories and stuff that helps illustrate the point, I think that's fine. But what I've run into is where the personality that's coming in is not necessarily connected to the content or not necessarily appropriate for the particular context. Tyler and I both have overtly Christian podcasts about entertainment. Tyler, remember me from Are You Just Watching?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now he remembers. We both started around the same time. And
Dave.
so in that, in a context like that, people know what to expect. So when we get those trolls that say, oh, blah, 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 this, well, that's fine. This show is all about this perspective. But what I ran into recently was a very controversial issue with one of my other podcasts where there was something that we could comment on, but we chose not to, because if we were to comment with, or if I were to comment with my true perspective, then it would have created a lot more trouble than it was necessarily worth for that small comment on a small particular thing.
Let me interrupt you, because that's what we do here, and I feel very comfortable interrupting the co-host especially. That's my job. But Daniel, that makes me think for you personally, because I don't know exactly what you're referring to in that example, but you have a show in your own network, right? So how does the potential of opening yourself up in one show sort of lend itself to spillover to your other shows?
Yeah.
It does a little bit, and people get to know me from the different content that I share, and I'm not afraid of occasionally bringing out like a spiritual reference in something. Like every now and then in the Audacity to Podcast, I'll mention a Bible verse that I think is relevant to the content that I'm sharing, or I'll say, even this proverb from Scripture, or even this idea from the Bible. And I've never had anyone complain about that. I guess I don't have Dave Jackson's listeners on my podcast. But yeah.
And it's good. It's an important point we haven't brought up yet. And Fred actually mentions in the chat. He says he thinks it depends on the nature of the show itself. He says he doesn't put too much personality into his business podcast, but he says I really do with my nonprofit podcast for veterans service organizations, Combat Infantrymen Podcast, 82nd Airborne Division Association Podcast. He says because the latter are so niche and very upfront, close, and personal due to the content and nature of the theme. So, with the religion and podcasting, and if the show, if you kind of know that going in up front, as a listener, you expect it, right? So it's kind of weird if you take offense to the religion. And Daniel, you said with the Audacity to Podcast, which is a podcast about podcasting, not necessarily where someone might expect to get scripture, right? And same with Dave.
Right.
So in that case, I can see where someone may say, hey, why do you need to share this, right? So it's interesting. Go ahead.
Well, the crazy thing that happened on one of these podcasts is that I chose not to share my personal opinion and belief on a particular matter. And wow, we got a lot of hate for that because people read so much into the fact that I said nothing about this particular subject. And they thought that meant I was against it. Some people thought that meant I was for it, but I was afraid. Some people thought that meant I hated certain groups of people. And this whole thing exploded because I chose to remain respectfully silent and not bring my personality out and my true personal beliefs. I wonder how much...
I imagine you addressed it then at some point.
Not that exact issue.
Not even to the point to say, here's why I didn't talk about it, right?
I have addressed it specifically with the 2 people who took the time to actually email and ask for why, instead of those people who were basically being trolls and posting hate publicly.
Trolls are definitely different. So, do with them what you want. Discard them. Daniel, you mentioned your experience. So you and Jeffrey got to work together at CES. And not the first time. So that is very tech-oriented. Maybe you guys are both on the show floor and interviewing people and who are producing products coming out at CES. So the interviewer gets a chance to, or the viewer gets a chance to see different personalities, right? All through one sort of channel. You guys come together and work for one channel. And so Jeffrey, it sounds like, maybe Daniel, maybe he could be considered a little stiff, and maybe in Jeffrey's a lot loose, right? So very different. Going into, what do you think about that in terms of, the subject is tech, so it's open. You got all kinds of personalities, right? So what do you take into those, into that sort of, into that situation where you're interviewing people at CES, and how much of yourself you're including to show the audience?
What I take from CES, it really depends on what the situation is, where it is. I mean, when we're sitting at the table, you're sitting at a table and you feel a little bit more free to express yourself. So
you do sometimes you sit up there and do like a broadcast table where everyone live stream talking about the event, and then you guys cut to remote interviews on the floor. Right?
Yeah, there's 2 parts to the job there. One is the booth that we set up. We started 4 years ago, and then the other part was the floor, just going booth by booth by booth and figuring out the situation. Now there's points. Yeah, my personality really comes out when it comes to a specific interview, because that's what I'm getting back from the person. Like, for instance, the first interview I ever did at CES was back at 2009 with a company called Vuzix, and they make headsets that create 3D television glasses, basically. And when we approached the booth, the other guys were just like, "Well, we'll just do a standard interview." But I saw this. They put a whole bunch of airline seats in the booth. And I said, well, I want to do this interview. And when I did, I got to talk to the CEO. We both sat in the seats, and we had these pairs of glasses on. We couldn't see each other, so it made fun, especially when I had to move the mic around. And I had no idea where he was going. I was like the guy from the Saturday Night Live skit where it's like, and the microphone's right in his face. And it brought a little bit more. Now there are some interviews at CES where I did turn around, and it was like, we were interviewing the CEO of Ford, and it's like, I think I need to be a little bit more refined when it comes to that interview. So it really depended on the situation there. And I think that's the same thing with podcasts. I mean, my Day in Tech History podcast, it's me reading down what happened in tech history. Like 2008, after public concern, Google decided to blur all the faces on the Street View program. That's actually what happened today on May 13th on 2008. I'm not going to sit there and go, they blurred all the faces because they found out how ugly I was. And I wasn't going to put a joke there or anything like that. So for that show, that's all straight through. But the show I just got done doing, Geek Smack, I do it actually a little bit different way, because I have a live version and I have the recorded version. If you go to youtube.com/geekazine and you watch that show, you're going to get 15 to 20 minutes of what I call the vlog section. where it's just me talking about what's going on. But if you go over to geekazine.com and watch that same show, it's going to start right at the tech. So I kind of give everybody a little bit of something. If they want to see what's going on in my life, they go over to the YouTube. If they want
you create extra work for yourself, which is which is great.
Not necessarily. Hard. No, not necessarily.
Okay. It is more. You're adding to your workflow regardless. So you're going out of your way to address the people who don't want, which is great. I mean, if you can do that, that's awesome.
Exactly.
And Gary Fawcett in the chat, he says, "I think if you love a podcast, how can you hate who the hosts are? Why would you listen?" And I think really when you listen to a podcast, I'm about to pick I have just chosen a contractor who's going to demo half my house, and half of that was chosen based on the relationship I have with that contractor. And when you sort of hit that subscribe button to a podcast, of course you're not giving them $50,000 to do something, but you are you're entering some type of relationship, right? And so who listens I'm sure that a couple people listen to a podcast for content only. I can think of maybe like a business show where they just need to know the law of running their business or something. But for the most part, you develop a relationship, even if it's not two-way, with a podcaster. Tyler, what do you think about that in terms of, do you think in general you can share on your podcast and, if people don't like it, they can leave. That's the beauty of a podcast. And, you get what you pay for.
Oh my, yes. I think for podcasting, I feel like you should always bring at least a little bit of yourself so that people know exactly who they're dealing with. Even if it's a business podcast, which admittedly I don't listen to any of them, so what do I know? But, I think the way Jeffrey does it is good because people can listen just to tech stuff. But if they are curious to know, okay, well, this guy is giving perhaps advice, he's giving news, but who am I even listening to? Am I listening to somebody who knows what they're talking about or has enough confidence in their own opinion or whatever? What is he bringing to this? I think almost anybody these days would acknowledge that everybody has a certain degree of bias, even if they're presenting what seem to be facts. The way they spin facts, the way they present them can be a function of who they are as people. And so giving listeners or viewers the opportunity to see exactly who you are, I think is one of the advantages of podcasting. That if you were just like a network news anchor or something like that, you can't necessarily do that. Everything is just, oh, he reads the news with authority, good for him, or whatever. But I feel like you need to bring at least a little bit of yourself, and then maybe even a lot of yourself, depending on the genre of podcasting.
Who's playing Mario in the middle?
I
of the
think he just leveled up with that conversation.
that comment. Nice.
I get that all the time when I'm on conferences at work. Why are you playing Mario and Zelda? I'm not. It's my phone.
It was pretty insightful, is all I'm saying. But but that's the thing. Like, if you are doing a comedy podcast, then you at least, if not bringing your personality, I think you at least need to bring your persona so that people have a general idea of who you are and your point of view. Because I've listened to comedy podcasts and I've listened to comedians in general who will just say joke after joke, and the jokes are funny, but they're also context free. Like, I don't know who it is telling me this joke. I don't know if they actually believe in this joke or what. And then when it comes to any kind of analysis, whether it be or interpretation, which is kind of where I come in from a movie standpoint. I mean, so much of it is subjective that I think it's good to know, maybe major things. Like, the very clear-cut example I have for myself is that certain types of romantic movies changed when I fell in love and got married. Suddenly, things that I used to think were super cheesy, now it's just like, oh boy, you know what? I get it. That makes total sense. Love is by its very nature cheesy, and suddenly I became much more forgiving of movies that were doing that organically. And then there are some movies that would do it in a calculating way. Like they weren't actually feeling this, but they knew that people have felt this in the past, and so, well, maybe we can just replicate that and get their money. And I became much less forgiving of movies that would do that. And so life experience had informed the way I approached an entire genre of film, and I feel like it helps the listeners to know that that's where I'm coming from, that something rings true because I personally have experienced it. And so, and then also I feel like you mentioned you're setting up you're establishing a relationship. That's 100% true. I mean, I've been on a number of podcasts in which I've been very open and honest. There's a podcast out there hosted by a comedian named Paul Gilmartin. It's called the Mental Illness Happy Hour, and it came about from him trying to deal with his own mental issues, and then he had a lot of comedians on and entertainers on to talk about the stuff that they've been through. And right around the time that started, I had recently been diagnosed with depression, and so I thought, I'll bet, and I knew Paul from his being on my show, and I thought, I'll bet he's not having a lot of Christians on his show, because Christians tend to downplay any kind of sadness that they might be feeling, because then it doesn't sell the faith really well. And so I thought, I will volunteer to be on his show, because it's a point of view that is not being explored, and it might be helpful to people that are listening and feel particularly alone. And so I put that out there, and it was really it was very personal. But I personally got a lot of emails back saying, you know what, I'm going through exactly the same thing, and I'm not getting any support from my local Christian community because they don't like to talk about this kind of thing. And so in this instance, well, go ahead.
So in some way, what I kind of hear from our conversation is that it sounds like it's great to have an outlet for the personality, but sometimes the specific podcast that you're hosting at a particular moment may not be the appropriate outlet, but maybe one of the other shows or a different episode or a different outlet altogether.
I think even within shows that don't lend themselves to that all the time, I think sometimes even just giving yourself a single episode, or even just kind of like a shorter episode that just lets people know who you are and where you're coming from. It
probably should not be your episode 0 or episode 1, right?
Right.
No, probably not. But probably early enough that like people, they've heard your, let's go back to business. They've heard your business opinions and your business advice, and then maybe about half a year in, you say, okay, so you've heard what I have to say, but this is where I'm coming from and how I arrived here from a personal standpoint, and then you can move on from then on. And then if people are curious, they have that to go back to.
Right. I find that interviews are a great way to help with that too. Like I've been on several shows. After you podcast for a while, hopefully you meet some other podcasters and you'll do that kind of cross-promotion thing. And I've had some great interviews from other people who have dove into that sort of past that it's not my audience per se, in terms of we're not talking about how to podcast or some other topic that I talk about, but we're talking about more about me as a podcaster, and I can always point people to that episode, which is really great. But so Dave, the low-hanging fruit here is sort of like some personality is good, don't overdo it, right? So how do we know how to walk that line, right? Not everyone has that ability to sort of know, when to share, when not to share, how much to share. Will your audience tell you?
I think in some cases maybe. I know when I first started podcasting about, 3 New Media Expos back, I had people say I was doing the opposite. I would go in and just the facts, here's what's going on, start a podcast, do it now. And they're like, how come you never talk about yourself? I'm like, because you're here to learn about podcasting. So they were like, I'd gone too far the other way. I've been listening to Scott Johnson does the Computer Tutor Florida show, and he just started about 2 months ago. He has these really cool computer tips. And he just started, I think he calls it like Get to Know Scott or something like that. And why it works is, I'm going to say it's a minute, maybe 2. There's not a huge investment, but I've known Scott for years, and I'm just finding out that he's a runner and he's doing all this stuff, and this is what his pet peeves are, and this and that. So there's just a little thing, and I told him, I said, keep those up. I said, because it's at the end, if I don't want to listen, I've already got my computer thing that he's talked about. but it's kind of cool, and it's not a huge investment. It's like, here's another minute and a half of my podcast. Here's something you maybe didn't know about me back in the 70s. I did this or whatever it was. So I love it because it's at the end. It's short, and it's when it takes up a lot of time, and especially if you're making people wait for the meat and potatoes. Right. And you've got to talk about how much you hate Bob Seger, and they're like, "Oh, I thought we were going to talk about microphones." That's
There's a great comment that somebody put in the room by Robert, and he says, "I think listeners are kind of voyeuristic by nature. They want to get to know who they're listening to, and getting personal is okay." And I think what you just mentioned is perfect. A little 2-minute snippet somewhere, maybe once a week. If you're going to do a daily show. But yeah, I agree. I think that bringing some of the personality in kind of sets you. It also sets you apart, right? They're not just getting to know who you are, but there's that getting to know who you are is setting you apart from the next guy who does a tech blog, tech blog like myself.
Which is a good point because Dave, myself, Daniel, all do essentially the same type of show, right? But we're very different people, and some of our listeners probably listen to all of us, and some of them listen to some of us because they like the way Daniel says it versus the way I said, or vice versa. Right. Dave, we've got your episode 400 where there was nothing but personality. And Dave, also, we've talked about this a little bit before, but probably in terms of promotion, where you kind of tend to, it's probably going to be more sticky, if you want to say, near the end, because the people who are likely to buy from you or go somewhere and buy something you recommend are the people who listen to the majority of your podcast, right? So instead of scaring someone off at the very beginning, could be the casual listener, the new listener, and putting it all up front before, like you said, get to the meat and potatoes, probably sharing a little bit more of yourself, if you want to do that, probably works best at the back end. That's just a suggestion. The best part of a podcast is you can do anything you want. But what do you think about that?
Absolutely. My wife, I didn't kiss her till the end of our first date. I didn't walk in and say, "Hi, I'm Dave. You're hot." Lip lock. It was, you had to build that relationship. She didn't know who I was, didn't know if she cared about me yet. We had a 7-hour first date. It was awesome. And so in the same way, you could say, well, if I put it at the end, then maybe they won't hear it. Well, then let's ask about why didn't they stick around. Now we got a problem with your content. They're not making people stick around. And so, put it at the end. Or if you put it in the middle, I just listened to Gary Leland's Fast Pitch Radio. He has like 20-second commercials. He uses them almost like transitions, and they're quick, in and out, and they're entertaining. You almost don't realize you're listening to a advertisement. You're like, oh, wow, that was kind of funny. And they're like, oh, wow, he's selling me a baseball bat. Okay. But by that time, he's on to the next piece of content. So, I would put him at the end if you're going to do anything like that. But Fred made a point in the chat room. I needed a place to just say whatever I wanted to say, so I started a separate podcast. And so it's not put out very frequently, but it's like there are times when I want to get on a soapbox, or there are times when that podcast has been flat out just therapy. I'm just going to talk to the world, and let's talk to strangers about my mental problems.
Yeah.
There are a few people who do that, where they have a podcast that's basically their audio journal, and I'm kind of torn by that, because if it's a celebrity, yeah, people are voyeuristic and want to know everything about a celebrity. But do really enough people care about my personal life for me to put out a separate podcast about nothing but my personal life?
Sure, though, but you don't have to listen, right? I mean, it's you know what you're getting going in, and if 5 people listen, then those 5 people, if it's doing something for you and it's doing something for those 5 people, good enough, right? Unless your aspirations are to make an income with that podcast, which I think is an important distinction here. What are we doing the podcast about? What are we doing it for? What's our goal?
Or grow an audience.
Right. Well, let's take a look at it this way. Back at the turn of the century, we had what were called live streamers, and they, iJustine started as a live streamer.
Turn of the century.
Yeah, it was a turn of the century. So
Charles Trippy, Shay Carl.
Back in the days when we were all wearing monocles and driving our horses. No, but you had like iJustine, and the person Jenny Cam started it all. Jennifer Ringley, and then Chris Perillo got on the thing. He did live streaming, and now he's doing vlogs, which is technically personal podcasts on YouTube.
Vlogs are a great example because there's a lot of people doing it. There's a conference for vlogs started by Perillo himself, but it's hugely popular. And
Exactly.
look at these YouTube channels. So hey, perfect. I found the perfect blend, right? Neil, technically, his main content is a YouTube channel, but I think where you find this most might be YouTube. You have mega YouTube
Yes.
stars who are just turning on a cam to talk about their day.
Well, it's life blogging. Shay Carl, the Shay Carl clan, and Charles Trippy, and then again, like Justine. They're literally just holding a camera 7 days a week, pumping out a video a week, and they're getting millions upon millions of views.
Millions. Yeah, I got to move kind of quick because we're getting
personal. Yeah, you're getting out of time.
We're getting near the end, but Jeffrey, you probably had a more of a point there, and I interrupted. But go ahead.
Well, actually, that was my point, and that's the reason why I decide to do this 15, 20 minutes before I start my show on YouTube. It is my VLOG vlog, and I could turn around and actually separate that out and then put that on just that 15 minutes on YouTube and have more content.
Yeah.
There's a great point in the chat. It says if you want to know how dreadful it is to listen to something with no personality at all, just tune into any commercial radio station in the UK.
Ouch.
Touche. Nice. Kudos.
Oddly enough, I'm sorry, I know that we do have to end. That is partially why I started a podcast in the first place. This was years ago. This was 2006, and I started listening to podcasts, and there just weren't a whole lot at the time. And I was like, oh, well, I started listening to comedy podcasts, and there were a few, and I thought, well, I like movies. Maybe I'll listen to some movie podcasts. And I don't remember what was available at the time. There was not very much. But I remember there was one that was, I don't think it was NPR, but it was something kind of official. And it was so lifeless and uninteresting, which
Must
is
have been
weird. Because well, I didn't want to be a jerk because some people love NPR. God help them.
Oh, sorry, I let my personality out there for a moment.
No, it's fine. It happens. And so, but yeah, and I remember thinking like, well, I love movies, and these people are boring me about movies. How is that even possible? And so, I had this weird thought, and then also, I've told the story on other podcasts, but it's one that is interesting because there was also a podcast called I Love Movies with Doug Benson. Doug Benson is a comedian. And he would have his comedian buddies on, and they would do a live show ostensibly talking about movies. Everybody involved clearly had opinions, and they clearly knew what they were talking about, but they would quickly veer away from movies into just general comedy. It was always funny. I enjoyed it. But I thought, oh, man, I want to hear these interesting, funny people talk about film in an in-depth way. And then on the other side, you had in-depth discussion of film. I don't know who these people are, but I know they're boring. And it came about because I thought, well, there are times when I can have a certain charisma to me, and especially when I'm talking with certain friends, I think I might be able to fill this gap that I am seeing. But I will have to bring more of myself than just a generic, seemingly anonymous opinion. Like, it will need to be right in the middle where personality shines through, but it doesn't overwhelm the analysis.
That said, and in a touche moment, and in a defense of NPR, who it would be cool if NPR was here to defend themselves, but take a look at our own shows, and then go take a look at the iTunes charts for NPR shows. So, I think they're doing something okay in the podcast world, but
they're doing something okay in the radio world.
No, they're doing plenty okay in the podcast world.
I know, but
if you just want to base it on charts, it depends on how we're measuring it, right? But they certainly have an audience. Of a huge audience, a huge podcast audience. So
50 million cigarette smokers can't be wrong.
It's yeah. Well, hey, however you want to get them to your show, if you get them to your show, you got them, right? And apparently, if they're smoking cigarettes, you got them for life. But yeah, again, it depends on what you're trying to do. Is a large audience important to you? Is it part of your business model? Does having this consideration about how much to share, is it based on what the goal is for your podcast, or does it matter? Is the goal of your podcast to podcast? Is it for a little bit for you? I mean, I think we've talked about how you get into podcasting. It generally tends to be for yourself. I hope it is, because that's probably going to keep you going, and then the audience will then push you past episode 100, 200, 300. But you may have extra considerations if if your goals include monetization. But maybe boring works because I see. The good thing is that both seem to work, right? We've got WTF, right, which is a highly successful comedy podcast where you're going to get nothing but personality of the host, Mark Maron, and you've got maybe an NPR show that may be considered dry. Both sitting at the top of iTunes, both doing very well for themselves. So.
Now, real quick, I feel bad. I don't remember if it was NPR.
I was just making a joke. It's fine. This is all subjective opinion, right? It is a good example. It's a great example because radio and it ties in well to the joke about the UK because radio, and when I talked about it earlier, there's that difference where podcasting gives you a chance to probably be more personal, right? Yep. So it's just a matter of we have to sort of decide for ourselves where we're going to draw that line, right? Just because you can doesn't mean we should. But
I'd like to add one more thing, and that's in the personality, not as much for the audio, but more for the video. Behind me, I have a brown curtain, but before that, I actually had a bookshelf, which we actually moved to a different part of the house. I'm looking for a new bookshelf. On my bookshelf, I had things. I mean, if you look on my wall, I have my signed copy of Brent Spiner's picture.
You were Leo Laporte. You had a Leo Laporte-like student.
Leo Laporte, my one Facebook share. On the shelves, I have things like my Bucky Badger because I am from Madison, Wisconsin, and fun little trinkets and stuff like that, which aren't there right now. You want me to pull it?
No, I'm scared.
Okay. So now I got to go and fix it because it's broken. But the whole point is that personality doesn't have to come from the voice, especially if you're doing video. It can come from your surroundings.
Yep, I agree.
Right. Yeah, and I used to have Neil's son throw different various peach pits and all kinds of things at me because I had a show. It started off as about how to pick and prepare fresh fruit. So boring, right? The local news has a green grocer who tells you how to do that, and I realized I have a podcast. Okay, I can do anything I want.
Do whatever we want.
Let's be different. Let's have fun. Now, measurement wasn't as good as it was today. Feedback wasn't as good as it was back in 06, 07.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it resonated, but the numbers were good. People like the content. They don't complain too much on YouTube. So it really is a blend. But for me, I inject a little personality into my music, right? So like Jeffrey, like you're saying, there are other elements to sort of inject your personality. In video, I can see Jeffrey's personality behind him. Apparently he's gone a little dark. Maybe he's not feeling so happy these days. But, if you do have all those trinkets, it is kind of neat to be let into sort of your studio. And maybe in most people, it's going to be your room. For me, in my show, it's a little bit of rock music up front. If it was a business podcast, it might not be considered necessarily appropriate. My show, in theory, could be considered business. I'm telling you how to make money with your podcast in some episodes. But this personality can come through other ways than just putting it out there verbally, which is kind of also a neat thing about podcasting. I'm going to wrap it up. I'm sure we could probably sit here for a lot longer and talk about it. It seems like we're doing a good job. But
such is the nature of podcasting.
Such is the nature. Well, see, the best part is we don't have to wrap it. If I didn't have to drive somewhere to get a little tiny human that depends on me, then we could go as long as we want. That's the one thing I love about podcasting. But maybe I limit the personality of the show a little bit. This is the first show where I think I've defined it, where we're kind of an hour. We've always been an hour, but we go over that. Sometimes we're an hour 25. But it's just breaking open ideas of how else. I'm thinking now, how else you sort of represent the personality of your show, right? If you're a show that just runs however long, right? That kind of says something about you. It's unstructured. These guys could do 2 hours. Leo Laporte, he could be 3 hours. He could be an hour on This Week in Tech, right? And some people, that evokes reaction, especially if you want to talk about doing 4, 5, 10-minute commercials. But so there are lots of ways to talk about personality. I was hoping that Jeffrey would stream from his Google Glass and show his give a look inside from his perspective. But you can't do that time. Quite yet, can you? For Google,
actually, they took it away in an update. So
Google giveth and they taketh away.
They take it away.
That's no surprise. They're going to take it away from all of us at some point. Google, our overlords. Accept them in your life. Daniel, thanks for joining us. Where can we find your lifeless show?
Over at the Audacity to Podcast.com.
That's right in the title.
Yeah. And also my podcast reviews, my new service that's launching soon.
Very cool.
.com, by the way.
.com. All right. Dave Jackson, thanks. I was kind of hoping Binky and the Wiz would show up. Maybe we get a little personality on this show.
Get a little personality, man. damn, that kills my voice. Find me at theschoolofpodcasting.com, man.
Nice. Wait, so Binky and Wiz is Dave Jackson? My mind is blown.
I know. It's No, go ahead.
A little depressing to find that out. Jeffrey Powers, where can we find your content? Thanks for joining us.
You can find me in many different places. Geekazine.com, dayintechhistory.com, iPad365.com, thisweekingoogleglass.com, and of course, if you go to Google+, you can go to the podcasters community. I am right there, along with you guys, talking with everybody about podcasting.
Yeah, definitely check out the podcasters community on Google+. A lot of times that's how we filter guests for the show. I put it out there, I say, who's got an opinion on this? And when people speak up, they get on the show.
And then I ban the post.
Then you ban the post, as you should.
And then I say, I can do it.
Yeah, right. I take it, I move it down, and I volunteer my services. Good strategy. All right. Neil, thanks for joining us. First-time Roundtabler. Hope you had fun.
I did. It was a blast. Thanks a lot. You can find me geekwithglasses.net, twitter.com/geekwithglasses, youtube.com, search for geekwithglasses, facebook.com/geekwithglasses. Basically, tech podcast, news reviews, product unboxings. And I'm getting ready actually to expand the show to a lot more content. I've got some friends that are in the tech industry that we're going to start some new segments on the show. So check it out, geekwithglasses.net. And again, Ray, thanks for having me.
Cool. I don't like having rules on the show, but I may have to just tell people one URL, and we could be here a long time. I'm messing with you. But Tyler, also new to the Roundtable, thank you so much for coming in. Thanks for sparking this conversation and being a little vulnerable with us. Appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I can be so much more. But okay, so you can find me at battleshippretension.com. That is just a general movie discussion website and podcast, and then that Christian film discussion podcast. Sorry, hang on. A Christian podcast that discusses films, not a podcast that discusses Christian films. Although we do that from time to time, and we tend not to care for them. But you can find that at morethanonelesson.com.
Fantastic. All right, podcastersroundtable.com. Get over there. Put yourself on the list. It is an email list. Sign up. You get a form. Let us know what you want to talk about. We'll have a discussion like this. We'll bring on the roundtable, and hopefully, if we go long enough, everybody in the community will be included. That is the goal. Once Google Plus lets me put 100 people onto a round, we're going to sweep up and get everyone on here in one fell swoop. So that'll be a fun one. We've done good with 8 or 9 people. That was actually fairly successful, but you're always sort of riding the line of danger there. All right, Podcasters Roundtable. What's that?
Last minute announcement, man. It's your fault.
Oh, last minute, Dan. I don't want to keep it the same. As a personality of this show is to keep you on your toes.
Yep.
We will see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.